Musical Talk, the UK's independent musical theatre podcast. Hello and welcome to another edition of Musical Talk. I'm Thos, which is just as well as I'm living in his house and using his bank account. Well, we live in unhappy times at the moment. I think that's quite difficult to argue with. But there's one surefire hit show which seems to make everybody happy, including me, and that is the wonderful Come From Away. And delightfully, in Britain, it's on a national tour. And you can find out all the details about where that's stopping at comefromawaylondon.co.uk. But what seems almost impossible to imagine is that the show is already 9 years old. It's a Canadian show, but it first hit the stage in 2015 at the La Jolla Playhouse in San Diego in California in America. Although it first started as a workshop in 2012. So actually I was wrong. It's really 12 years old. And after San Diego, there was no stopping it. It went from success to success. It reached Broadway in 2017, and it made the London stage, the West End, in 2019, where it opened in February and then continued until January 2023, only last year, a run of 5 years in which it clocked up over 1,000 performances. And we should mention that London production was actually a transfer of the Irish production in Dublin, because it originally opened in December 2018 at the Abbey Theatre there before coming to London at the Phoenix Theatre in February 2019. But what an amazing production that was. I saw it and I loved it. But I'm so pleased that it's on a national tour now. And so it's going to be Come From Away that we're going to be speaking about this week and next week, but rather splendidly from two slightly different angles. Because this week we're going to hear a conversation I held with David Kingsmill, which I recorded in Edinburgh in 2019. And he had just seen Come From Away in London, even though he's actually now a resident of Canada. And of course, it is a Canadian musical. Irene Sankoff and David Hine are the people behind the book, music and lyrics, and they're both Canadian. And then next week we're going to hear a conversation that I had with Josh Clark about the London production, which he and I saw only a couple of years ago before it closed. So if you like, you're going to hear an early discussion about the impact of Come From Away from David, and then you're going to hear a much more in-depth review about Come From Away, having seen it in the London production with Josh Clark next week. Now, you might say, well, hang on a minute, why on earth do you still have a recording from 2019 which you've not aired? Well, the truth is, here on Musical Talk, we record a lot of things, line it up for broadcasting, and then, for whatever reason, things get removed from the schedule at the last minute quite often to make way for something else which is more time-pressing or relevant. And then sometimes those things which have been displaced fall off the radar. And so it is with this recording. So today's episode is a recording, as I say, that I had with the wonderful David Kingsmill, a one-time presenter of Musical Talk many years ago until he moved to Canada, who was back in Scotland in 2019 with his partner, Rebecca Perry, because they were both in a show which was fabulous and which we reviewed here on Musical Talk, called From Judy to Betty, the Stars of Old Hollywood. And rather splendidly, David found time to have a quick conversation with me during his very busy and hectic schedule to talk about some of the shows which he had seen in London before he'd come to the Edinburgh Festival Fringe. And one of those was Come From Away. But we'll also be having an interesting conversation about Six, and indeed several other shows which he saw at the time which he wanted to talk about. And there's also quite an interesting conversation with David about his view on transatlantic progressive politics in musical theatre. So that's quite a lot for this week. And as it's quite a lot, it doesn't behove me, as they say, to hang around any longer. So let's hear that conversation with David, where he talks in the summer of 2019 about Come From Away and several other shows which you could have seen in London at that time. Here's David. Musical Talk, the UK's independent musical theatre podcast. Well, David, you do not know how much pleasure it is to see you here in Edinburgh and on the microphone. This feels in two ways like a homecoming.
Yes, bless you. Likewise, it is a delight to be back and talking to you.
And, well, you're here in Edinburgh with a show at the moment.
Yes.
With Rebecca Perry. Mm-hmm. A very, very excellent show, as I say, which we've already discussed on Musical Talk. But it's good of you to squeeze an hour out for me. So how's the show going for you?
Extremely well. Yeah, we're very happy with it right now. We've had some lovely reviews come in recently, including yours, of course. And
you've had a proper constellation of stars thrown at you by all manner of people.
I've been trying to work out fun ways of saying it, and I think my favourite one right now is we've had 18 out of a possible 20 stars so far.
That is pretty good, actually.
We're very, very happy. I think I worked that out right. Yes, we're very happy with that. So that's feeling good. Yeah, Edinburgh's treated us pretty well on the whole.
Except perhaps weather-wise.
The weather's been absolutely diabolical.
Yes.
I don't know. I heard on the radio the other day that where are we now? It's Sunday. I think it was Wednesday. 60% of Edinburgh's expected August rainfall happened in 3 hours.
Yes, I think my head was out in it at the time. Along with the rest of me, as a bald man, I'm very sensitive to rain falling. I feel it immediately.
Yes, but yeah, no, and we've got some industry coming in to, hopefully will lead to talking about taking the show places. So yeah, we're very happy.
But you are global. You're a citizen of the universe, certainly globally, at least, in the sense that you live in Canada, you've got connections in London, you've been all over the world with shows.
Yes.
But of course you go and see shows here, there, everywhere, and today I think we're going to be tapping into some of your more recent experiences.
Absolutely. Yeah, actually, part of my honeymoon, we came into the UK largely because we were going to one of the Spice Girls concerts, which was the timing of the whole thing, actually, ironically, was around that.
Was it really?
Yeah, it was, well, we're going to the UK anyway. Why don't we just... here's our 3-week gap, let's go. Which was delightful. And we had a wonderful time, Greece and Spain, for anyone who's curious, and the UK. And so we went to the Brighton Fringe and saw a few shows there, and then we came up to London, and ironically, given that we both... Rebecca's Canadian, we both live in Toronto, we finally saw Come From Away.
Here in London?
Here in London. Having, largely a ticket price thing, because ticket prices for the major shows in North America, I think, but in Canada and Toronto are very, very high.
They seem inflated compared even to London prices, and London prices are now ridiculous. But there are still some shows which you can find in London which are good value and good price.
Well, or you can see, you can go and do the Phantom of the Opera £25 back at the balcony, and it's not the same view you'd get if you were sitting in the stalls, but you still get a damn good show out of it.
Well, you mean you can hear what's in the theatre next door? Oh, did I show my colours?
I didn't actually have that experience. Funny, I found it quite entertaining watching the Phantom running around the balcony prepping for all the different descends.
Oh, really?
And things like that.
Oh, your theatre eyes.
See some of the trickery that goes on, which is quite entertaining. Although none of the real sort of magic tricks.
Yeah.
But some of the prep.
The logistical stuff. Perhaps. Yeah.
Which I enjoy, because the stage manager part of my brain switches on and goes, oh, that's how they do it.
The magic of theatre. It's always actually, funny enough, the magic of theatre is interesting when you can see how it operates as well as when you don't.
It's so
I
true.
agree with you, yeah.
So true. I think Come From Away, I guess, is as good a place to start as any, really.
Well, as you had.
Yeah, quite. Oh my goodness, what a show.
Would you care to briefly describe it for those people who haven't seen it?
Absolutely. So Come From Away, it's become extremely famous now, and the fact that it has been as visible as it has in the US and the UK, being a Canadian show and a Canadian story, I think is testament to how well the show is written, but also how human the story is that's behind it.
And therefore universal.
Universal. And that is the story of a small town on Newfoundland, which, for those who are not aware of it, is an island off the east coast of Canada. This small town's name is Gander, and the big deal with Gander is back in the day when planes were smaller, that was the place that planes would stop when they were doing transatlantic flights.
Oh, so it had a bit of international repute.
Yes, so you would fly from the UK or wherever to somewhere in southwest USA. You would probably stop in Gander to refuel and take back off again. And then when bigger planes, and I'm taking this from the show, by the way, this is no historical research of my own, but when the planes became bigger and more capable of long flights, Gander Airport just kind of fell into disuse except for people who were flying to Newfoundland.
So it became mostly obsolete, certainly in big terms. Yes.
Suddenly stops being obsolete in a big way September 11th, 2001, when all the planes were grounded post the attacks on the World Trade Center and the Pentagon and the hijacking of United 93. And a lot of planes, and I forget the exact number, but a gigantic number of planes landed at Gander, Newfoundland, which is this tiny little town, and they suddenly get swamped with people who have no idea what's going on. It was some hours before they had a clue of why they were being grounded. They were just sent to Gander, and the people of Gander rallied in enormous fashion. They brought in help from all the towns around. They took these people into their homes, into their churches, into the town halls. They fed them. They gave them anything that they could possibly want. There's a very comedic skit during the show of a guy going back to Shoppers, which Shoppers Drug Mart is sort of the Canadian Boots, going back there to pick up all the different bits and pieces that are needed, get more toilet paper, get more of this, that and the other. There's going to be babies, get baby food.
Yes.
And it's just this extraordinarily human story of how this island and this small town rallied to essentially save people who had no clue what was going on, and how those people survived it, because you see it from everybody in the show plays multiple characters, and you see it from the perspective of the islanders. You also see it from the perspective of the come from aways, which is the Newfoundland name for anybody who comes there who is not from there, and it's just beautiful. It's very traditional Newfoundland folk music, which has very, very strong Celtic roots, because of course it's the closest to the UK, so a lot of Irish settlers who went over found their way there.
So it would sound familiar and resonant to a British ear. Yes, quite.
Yeah, absolutely. It's extremely accessible music while also being extremely evocative of where it comes from, which I think that familiarity isn't always the case when you say the second part of that sentence. In this case, it's very much there, which makes it so easy to get into. It's brilliantly written, brilliantly performed by the West End cast. I loved it. I do not have enough good things to say about it.
May I ask you a question? Because I've not seen it.
Okay.
And from your description, the description you've given me sounds intriguing and interesting and absolutely packed full of humanity, which was one of the first words you spoke about, being humane. And that's so important, I think, certainly in realistic musicals and drama, full stop. But it almost sounds contextual rather than specific. And the example here would be something like Titanic. We all know the story of Titanic, but actually in order to get a story into the Titanic context, you have to have a Jack and Rose kind of story, if you like. Is there a central protagonist character in here? Is it how a world event at a local level affects individuals? So how is it focused for us as an audience?
It's a really interesting question, actually, and I think the answer to that is quite hard. And having only seen it once, my response to that is, I think there are a few characters who stand out and are deliberately written to stand out, but I also think that the people who stand out will be perhaps the people who you latch onto as characters within the story. There are definitely some big payoff moments at the end of the show where characters get a moment and your perhaps suspicion that they were a focal point of the show is ratified.
But it's more of an ensemble and a tableau, is it?
It is, and in one song it's difficult to name a character because of course they play so many people. So Rachel Tucker, who is in the cast right now, plays 3 different characters, I think. It's either 3 or it's 2, I can't remember. She does play 3 in the show, in one song.
Gosh, right.
And she'll sing the part of her Islander character and then sit down for a moment and sort of turn her back and stuff will go on in front of her, and then she suddenly stands back up as the airline pilot, and she's gone from being a local Newfoundlander who's helping out to being the American pilot of one of these planes who has what I think is, in my mind, one of the more devastating songs in the show because of the perspective that a pilot has on everything that's going on.
Also the voice of officialdom in a strange way as well.
Yes.
Yeah.
And I think
that puts people on different statuses, doesn't it?
Yeah, and you hear air traffic control in this, but you hear air traffic control Gander. And so I think actually in some ways the pilots are almost the most official because they're the ones that are having the most able conversations with America to work out what's going on.
Because we shouldn't forget, it wasn't clear on the day for anyone in the world who was following it what was happening until it had sort of unfolded. It was a case of, oh my goodness, what's this? Oh my goodness, what more is this?
Yeah, and there was so much focus for a long time on the World Trade Center because it was visible, because it was being filmed, and then someone suddenly says, oh God, the Pentagon, and then there's another crash, and what else is going on?
Like a lot of people, I remember that day very clearly, almost minute by minute.
Oh my goodness, same here. I know exactly where I was at the time. And I think, I always thought that was not a melodrama, but an over-exaggeration of somebody saying things will happen in your life and you will always know where you were.
Kennedy
now
moment,
I look back at that and I go, no, I know exactly where I was, and I can literally picture the piece of music I was writing at the time.
It's that and the death of Diana, I think, in a British context, yes.
Actually, funnily enough, I think I don't remember where I was for Diana. I think I may just be too young.
No alibi.
Nice try. But I do. There are a couple of other moments where I don't remember the details of the day as clearly as this one, because of course the extent and the extremity of it was so big. But there are definitely points where it's like, I remember roughly this thing happened. You suddenly realise the veracity of that statement. Yes, you do just sometimes remember where you were, it tells you something about the scale of what's going on too.
So, taking us back then to Come From Away, I'm intrigued by this idea of it really being, if you like, a sort of a melee musical, a sort of ensemble tableau. I've used those words already, but that seems to be the best way of describing it. A series or a progression of characters affected. How do you get, or how did you detect a sense of narrative development? Is it just these people and their story? Is it episodic? Because that can work.
It's chronological.
So it's not a fusion of this and that and other in a slightly impressionistic.
No, this doesn't do it justice, and it's not a good way of describing it, but right now, in my middle of the fringe, I'm exhausted state, it's the best thing I can come up with. It has a sense of an episode of 24.
Okay.
In the sense that it is all happening chronologically, and when you cut to someone else, it is either happening at exactly the same time as what you just witnessed, or it is happening immediately afterwards, and there is a consistent sense of progression. And the show never stops moving. And when it does, and I mean that physically, like the actors on the stage, and if they ever do stop moving, it is very definitely for a purpose. It's a very active show. I don't know how any of them can breathe when they come off the other end of it, because it's a big sing, and it's a big move, and it's a big dance. But to give an example, there's a moment, not to give something away, if you want zero spoilers for this show at all, skip ahead by about a minute. There is a moment where, I think it's the mayor of the town who says it, they bring in the Sally Army to come and welcome, and the Salvation Army building is one of the places that the buses of the Come From Ways are being sent, and they come up in dress uniforms so that they're smart and welcoming to everybody who's coming there. And then you cut to I'm going to say African because I can't be more specific than that. There's an African character who is on one of these buses who perceives it as a bunch of soldiers waiting for them to get off the bus. And you cut from the mayor saying the Sally Army came out to immediately this other character saying there's soldiers waiting for us outside in uniform. And that's the kind of cut that you get. And it's a similar cut then when you transition between even the same person playing two different characters. It will be a direct progression from something that has just happened.
I tell you, the way you're describing it sounds very cinematic.
Yes. If they filmed this, it would be incredible. It would be a...
work.
It would work extremely well. I want to say, I may just be completely dreaming or daydreaming this, but I want to say that the rights have been, or at least under discussion if they haven't been picked up by somebody.
It's certainly possible, isn't it, by the way you're describing it?
I can't remember whether it was just somebody saying it would be fun if, or if I actually read somewhere that they had been. But anyway,
let us see.
Regardless, it would be a very good idea. I think it would make a great film.
And it's still on in London, I think.
Yes, at the Phoenix. Which is also a great theatre for it. And the set for this is brilliant. There's so little of it. They've built these gigantic trees that just kind of disappear from... They start at the stage level and just disappear into the flies.
Oh, right, I see. To give you a sense of the landscape you're in.
Scale,
right, yes.
And the band kind of hides in amongst them, which is great. They have signage...
You can't see the woodwind for the trees.
If that makes it onto the recording, that was me banging my head on the table. But they also have signage for, I think it's Molson Canadian, which is the sort of entry-level Canadian lager, which is extremely popular across. Okay. And they have Tim Hortons, which is the cheap coffee chain. And they just have these little bits here and there, and it just tells you, especially if you're English and don't know any of this stuff and don't recognise it, it just tells you you're somewhere else without having to be in Oz.
Yes, it's a non-laboured geographical pinpointing system, isn't it? Yes,
and Tim Hortons is so specific. I mean, Molson, I think you can get elsewhere, and it's a Coors company, so I'm sure that's recognisable. But Tim Hortons is just a very, very Canadian thing, and it's a very subtle thing, and it just does the job.
That's all you need sometimes. In fact, subtlety is too rarely valued. Sometimes in theatre, sometimes it's bigger isn't always better, is it?
Nope, very true.
So that's a big thumbs up for
gigantic thumbs up. And one of two shows that get a thumbs up of that scale, the other one being Six, the musical.
Ah, right, this is interesting because I've seen Six, so I should be very interested to hear your views on this.
I love it. I think it is an absolutely fantastic show. I think it does what it sets out to achieve.
And do you want to briefly explain what that is?
Yes. It is essentially, the idea is that the 6 wives of Henry VIII have met up after their various demises to have a battle of the bands about who had the worst time with Henry.
They're a girl band, essentially, aren't they?
Yeah, they are. They become a girl band, and they're all written to be inspired by contemporary pop artists. And actually, if you look in the program, it will say this person was inspired by Rihanna, this person was inspired by Britney, this person was inspired by Lady Gaga, and those influences in their individual songs. And this is a show of individual songs whilst weaving in a group. Those influences are so strong and so well written, you can identify who is who. And even not knowing most of these people, there were points where I was like, oh, that's so-and-so, right? And Rebecca, who knows these artists well, was like, yes, that's right. You can see them very, very easily. But by no means is that to say there's parroting or parody going on. It's just a nod to a style for the most part.
So, because this is a real insight to me, because I've seen it and I do not have these references at all, obviously.
Right.
Absolutely closed book to me. For me, it was a rock concert, as I understand rock concerts to be. I wouldn't have been able to identify any substantial difference in the style or tone of any of the songs. I could tell they were different songs, but I wouldn't have been able to say, oh, this is influenced by X, Y, or Z. Therefore, I don't think I'd realised that it was not a parody, but a pastiche.
Yeah.
In some senses. It just happens to be an extremely contemporary pastiche.
It is, yeah. Which, I think that's a good description.
For those of us who are old-fangled, less meaningful. And that might explain why I suspect we're going to come to slightly different conclusions about this musical.
Very possible.
However, do carry on with... so you've explained it.
Yeah.
So you've described it as your second big thumbs up.
Yes,
and you do have two big thumbs.
Spoiler alert, I liked it.
Yeah. Well, we'll talk about my position in a minute, because I didn't dislike it.
For sure. Okay, fair enough. Well, yes, one of the things that stand out about this show as well, which I thought is unusual and noteworthy, was that there is an entirely 100% female presence on stage. The band is female. There's a live band, which, if I remember correctly, is 4 people. So there are 10 women on stage throughout this show, and that's just cool. I think one of the things I've realised living in Canada, and this is no condemnation, but Canada is further ahead in gender equality and all that sort of thing than England is, and so it's refreshing to come back and see shows that are pushing boundaries in any which way. And I speak from experience in this, because those of you who've been listening to my ramblings since 2014 will remember I did a musical called Out of the Lens at the Edinburgh Fringe. And Nick and I, after we finished doing...
This is your co-writer?
Yes, my co-writer, Nick. The very brief description of this was exploring the relationship between a gay man and a straight man, and how they fell into this confused uncertainty of what their relationship was before turning out to be friendship at the end, and both settling into knowing who they were and moving on.
It's an odd relationship between a creative person, in this case a photographer, and their muse.
Yes, that too. But the specific point of note for this purpose is the look at sexuality. This show, we tried selling it. I don't think we really knew how to do it well enough. We tried selling it, and to no success, after the Edinburgh Fringe, and were told by several producers that it was a really eye-opening thing, and that they hadn't seen this kind of relationship in theatre before, and that it was exciting to see something new, with absolute genuine. They then didn't buy it. That's not to say that they were trying to let us down easy. They were being very genuine about this. I took it over, and in August of 2015, this went into a program called Musical Works in Toronto, and it got 3 performances there, including one that had a talkback afterwards. And in that talkback, I was fundamentally decimated by a gender politics student for my portrayal of the gay character as being outdated and unnaturally predatory in a way that was offensive to somebody who understood that wider community. Now, I had lived in Canada for a year and a half previously, but I hadn't had the exposure to their state and gender politics. And I look back at it now, and it's just so interesting to me that something that was opening doors in England was old hat in Canada, to a point where it had moved past. Now, Canada also, they have issues with their historical treatment of the indigenous population and the First Nations over there. And so I think they are forcing themselves to move forward quickly because they have a lot to make up for. But I think that was just a fascinating thing. And so to wind back to the conversation we were having, to come over here and see a show that is entirely female was extremely... And female and fundamentally, justifiably, I will state, but fundamentally ripping apart the male that they all have in common in a way that was not in any way degrading, but was just saying, hey, we're women, we're missed out of the picture. History shouldn't forget who we are either. Was extremely refreshing.
Let me just put my position on this,
please,
because it is, of course, the big recent Fringe success. It started up
massively.
here as a much smaller production down in the Grass Market in the Apex.
In Sweden, yeah.
That's right.
Moved to Pleasant?
Yes, but last year, which is where I saw it. I didn't see it the first year round. I saw it last year when a lot of money had been pumped into it.
For sure.
And it became a much bigger rock concert-y thing, in the sense of it felt like being in a rock concert as far as I could.
Well, it also got, I think it's got support from George Styles. Like there's a lot of the big names have kind of got behind this. I'm in
no way surprised. It's very accomplished.
Mm-hmm.
It looked good. If you like the kind of music, I have no doubt that it's excellent. My ear is a little bit tin in comparison for that kind of music, but that in itself is not a problem. So it looked good. It was great fun. I found, however, that I think it lacks heart.
Okay.
And that is my problem with it. It's emotional position, because I don't think it's got any real plot. It's ostensibly the wives in this band, the girls in this band, I suppose you might want to call it that way, fighting for who's going to be the lead. It's not just, as you say, it's who had the worst time, and whoever had the worst time gets to be sort of lead singer or lead member of the group. That seems to be it. And then later on, they sort of the ending then sort of tacks on this thing at the business about, well, it's terrible that we're only remembered as the wives of Henry VIII when we are women in our own right, but then Henry's only really remembered because of us. But what I couldn't see was where its heart was, because I can't see what it's actually telling anyone. I can't see what journey any character has. Now, maybe I'm looking at it wrongly. Maybe it's not a narrative piece. In fact, it clearly isn't a narrative piece. It's a concept piece. You could strip that story out completely and still have all those songs and not have them as the wives of Henry VIII. I appreciate the songs are character specific and represent their experiences. However, you could just get a girl band or any band to cover those songs in a concert environment and probably still get much the same joy. Obviously, there's a certain amount of fun of thinking, oh, look, the Six Wives of Henry VIII can make it's exactly the right size for a girl band or any band. You know, so it's very neat, it's very clever, it's very extremely well produced, it's extremely well performed, and I know that I'm very much in the minority, but I can't see what it's about.
I see where you're going with that.
And I should just balance that, by the way, by saying, when I saw it last year in this enormous venue here at Edinburgh, I think it was the Underbelly. One of the big tent. Yeah, it was one of the big ones. And obviously rapturous applause. And as I got up to leave, the family behind me, one of them turned to his friend and said, "That's the best musical I've ever seen." And I thought to myself, "You've not seen a musical, you've just seen a pop concert." I didn't say that, but I thought it very loudly.
And I totally understand where you're coming from. I think, and my own opinion of that may be tarnished by a couple of things, which is I heard the music first.
They got it
Rebecca
out there, didn't they? Yeah.
saw it. She didn't see it at Sweet, when it was at Sweet. I found it in the program.
It was a much more modest production, I believe.
It was, yeah. I found it in the program when we were sort of planning her, because she came over to research that year and look at shows, and I found it in the program, and it was on the shortlist for a while, and then it fell off. Yeah.
You do have to make decisions, don't you?
Well, and she was only over here for 10 days or something. Like you can't do anything in the Fringe in 10 days. She did go back to see it the next year, and then saw it I think she saw it twice that year and then has seen it multiple times in the arts. Every time she comes over to England, if she can get near London, she'll go and see it. And so I also she brought the CD back at one point, and I also had somebody who absolutely loved it, kind of, bigging it up for me, for want of a better phrase. And so I also came over knowing the music very well, and so having a rock concert maybe wasn't so much of an issue for me. That said, I totally take your point. It's not a narrative piece.
No, it isn't.
The narrative behind it, I think, as much as there is a major one, if there is a major one, is the women coming to realise that it's important that they have their say, which it is, and they should each get to have their say, which they should, but getting to that point where they go, but hang on, if we all band together and have our say, then that's the best thing that can happen. And I think ultimately that's probably the narrative.
Yes, I mean, I agree that I think we're clutching. I think it's more keen to make points than it is to make sense, if that makes any kind of sense.
And in the grand scheme of things, if that is a piece of political musical theatre, it does a damn good job of it. Because it pushes that message across without beating you around the head. You don't feel like you're sitting there. I don't feel like I'm sitting there as a cisgender white male, which, let's face it, is the most privileged population demographic in the world right now. I don't feel like I'm sitting there being vilified, and I don't feel like I'm sitting there being emasculated. I feel like I'm sitting there, understanding that point by having fun.
Yes.
Which is the best way to get a message across. If you sit there and lecture me for 2 hours, I will sit there going, yep, okay, yep, whatever. If you actually present a point in a way that is engaging and enjoyable, that's when it comes across, and it does do that very well.
I would say, and this is purely anecdotally, that my experience of, because I talk about it with various people, because it's a phenomenon and should be recognised as such.
Especially now, Australia's coming up, Broadway's coming up, 2 cruises, I think. It's going everywhere.
But the thing I think that's interesting is that I would say that it's about 80% appreciation, 20% non-connection.
Okay.
But most people like it, and I just think it's in the wrong venue. But, or maybe I should say, it's entirely right that a show like that should be in the world of musical theatre, but I would be appalled if lots of shows were like that, were in the world of musical theatre.
That's actually probably reasonable. I haven't really...
There was no right or wrong answers in it.
No.
Yeah.
I haven't thought about it that far ahead. I always say, and I'm going to forget the 3 words that I use now, there are innovators, there are developers, and there are propagators in creativity. I would like to think that at some point in time I would be able to hit one of the other categories, but I think that for the most of my work I sit in propagation. I take what's known and I do my own version of it, and I hope I do it well.
Polish, buffer, move it on a bit, yes.
Yeah, I don't think I
That's a very
necessarily
valid thing to do,
move anything forwards, and I certainly don't think anything I have done so far has reinvented the wheel. So I think I see the value in what is being propagated, and I see the value of what is being passed on through that propagation in terms of the message, and in terms of the genuine entertainment that people take from it. Is it the most innovative show in the world? No, not as a academic piece of musical theatre, but I think it has other things that speak for it, that allow it the phenomenon that it has become to be completely valid.
Yes, it's doing something very different to normal musical theatre, and in that sense is to be welcomed. But looking at it through a different prism, through a different lens, if you like, harking back, then, most musical shows, and this is neither a good thing nor a bad thing, you can strip the songs out if you want to do so, and you can see the play beneath.
Right.
It may not be complete, because the songs obviously, in a good musical, do quite a lot of the work. If you strip the songs out of this, I think you'd have essentially 2 sentences at the end of the play explaining what the point is. i.e. that he draws from us, Henry, and we draw from him.
Yeah.
And we, recognition is important. So I don't have any argument with the arguments being made. But in terms of what it means for musical theatre, if it's a lovely little subset, that's fantastic. If it turns out to be a bear moth that takes over the entire industry, then I will be less delighted. But there we are. That's what musical theatre's about.
Agreed.
If you and I agreed on everything, it would be terribly, terribly dull. And I, in no way, take anything away from the production.
For sure.
Because I didn't hate it at all.
No.
I'm just the wrong person to go to it.
That's fair.
Yeah.
And I mean, there's you say the word production, and I think actually this is a production.
Yes,
it's
it is.
It's not anyone, like everything about this is stunning. The lighting is incredible. The set is exactly what it needs to be. The score, if you like the music, is fabulous. There's songs in this that get stuck in my head and won't leave for days. The costumes are incredible. They are so beautiful to look at. Actually,
there's some sexy rough action, if you like that. RUFF.
Yeah, quite. But the design behind them, each one is unique. Each one has its own personality and character to it. And while they all are definitely designed to be appealing to the eye, they have character.
Yes, they do. I agree with that. Absolutely.
They're not just there for the sake of looking good. They're there to also, like, the sort of Anne Boleyn is portrayed as sort of this ditzy girl who kind of gets herself into messes because she just says stuff and it comes out before she thinks about it. And she has the slightly
She's an
more...
in the moment girl, isn't she?
And she has the slightly more miniskirt, kind of cute look about her. She's got an Avril Lavigne-inspired moment in her song, like, that plays into that. Whereas, oh my goodness, who's number 3?
Jane Seymour.
Jane Seymour, thank you, has the this much more considered, beautiful song about the fact that she never gets to see her child because she dies in childbirth. And she has a more... Like, she's catty. One of the first things she says is, "I'm Jane Seymour, the only one he truly loved," which all 5 of the others turn around and just say, "Rude." Which is very cute, and she has moments like that, but she has this very heartfelt song. And there's something about her costume that even, again, it's appealing to the eye, but it is done in a way that is a bit more demure, and it's a bit more of a presentation gown type thing, even while being a rocker's dress. And it's just, I
think what you're saying is they're all thought through.
They are, and I fixate on the costumes a little bit just because it was after the show itself, it was the first thing that caught my eye, was exactly how well designed I thought they were. And actually, funnily enough, anyone who saw the recent Spice Girls concert or any of the multitude of photographs that have come out of them since, same costume designer.
Oh, that's interesting.
I started following them on Instagram because I was curious about who designed the Spice Girl stuff, and then I suddenly started seeing all these concept drawings for 6.
Well, and that parallel is absolutely obvious then in that sense, isn't it? Because they are a girl band, it is a rock concert, everything about why... Yeah.
One of the most logical segues I think I've seen in someone's career of how my mind has associated two things. And I was just like, well, of course it's the same person. But yes, we should move on because I could dwell on those 2 shows for hours and... not be done. But I'm going to do, it is the Edinburgh Fringe, as Thos has pointed out, and the Edinburgh Fringe means everyone's on a time limit. So I'm just going to sort of zip through a few things, if
please.
I may.
So it's a miscellany of other shows you've seen.
Miscellany of other shows,
and your headline thoughts.
Just bits, and I haven't, honestly, this is the thing, I haven't seen anywhere near as much musical theatre as I would like. And I'm saying I'm going to say a miscellany of shows, and I'm trying to think what I've actually seen so that I can give some responses. I saw everyone's talking about Jamie.
Oh, yes,
that was the other thing that I saw. I enjoyed it.
Original cast? Because it's Leighton Williams has recently taken over as Jamie.
So I saw it. I don't know. Honestly, we were It was part of the honeymoon trip. So it would have been in early June
last year.
This year.
Oh, fine. Yeah, definitely Leighton Williams. Yeah.
Yeah. Oh goodness, who's
a former
drag queen who was in it? Bianca Del Rio.
Oh right. Okay.
Playing. What's the character's name? Loco Chanel. I really enjoyed it. I thought it's a fun show. I think it's another story of a type that needs to be told more of some of the challenges that you can face being somebody who identifies as gender non-binary in any way, and a multitude of other identifications that you can have. And I think it was very enjoyable. The one thing I took slight exception to in that show was the lyrics. I really enjoyed the music. I was humming some of the songs for a little bit. It wasn't as memorable as Come From Away or Six, although possibly not because I haven't listened to it as much. But I did find the lyrics were a little repetitive at one point. There was one moment where I counted Jamie singing the same thing 12 times in a row before he sang another sentence. That is a perfectly valid way of writing music. I personally don't think it is a good way of writing musical theatre, and I found that a sticking point. That aside, great show, really enjoyed it. I would recommend it if you get the chance. I think it's a good piece of musical theatre.
Just briefly to give you my opinion, I did see it and I enjoyed it once again, but there's a problem with Jamie as far as I can see, which is it's very difficult to see actually what the jeopardy is. He has an incredibly loving and supporting home life.
True.
He was abandoned by his father, and it's all about father issues in that sense.
And yet the father gets
is a
so
rotter.
little stage time.
Yeah, exactly. And actually, Jamie is terrible to his mother for much of the play. So, but I'll tell you what it feels like. It feels like a white poster British comedy film turned into a musical. And it might one day go the other direction, I think. I can see that musical being turned into a British comedy film. I enjoyed it. I don't think it's perfect by any means.
No.
But yes, it's a welcome addition to the West End.
I would agree. What other things I said? Oh, well, one thing I saw again, and I have to mention it because it's just so good. And it's a little while ago now, but while it was touring Toronto, I saw Gentleman's Guide to Love and Murder.
Oh, which we have been deprived of in London.
Yes, and that is criminal. It is criminal. It's the most Gilbert and Sullivan-y thing that anyone has written since Gilbert and Sullivan is written by Americans. It's
why
it's not where you would expect it to come from, and it's done so well.
I have seen some of the YouTube video presentations of bits of it,
right.
And it does look like a hoot.
It's screamingly funny.
And you're right. It's also an extremely successful GNS kind of pastiche.
Yeah.
And so I don't know who the writers are, but all power to their elbow, I say.
I did know their names back in the day. I couldn't remember them right now, but I know they're both American, and they wrote this incredible, very British. No, it's based off. It's an Ealing comedy.
It is.
It?
It's Kind Hearts and Coronets,
yeah.
Which incidentally has just been cleaned up for Blu-ray release as a film in this country. So
if
people want to see the original material, that is now available.
I'd rather like to see that because I didn't know it was when I first, because I saw it in on Broadway,
which is where it started. Yeah,
2012, 2014, something like
that.
It was the year that it was Tony nominated. Yeah, I remember at the time thinking I've no idea. Where this has come from, and I assumed it was original, and then found out it was an Ealing comedy, and it didn't surprise me in the slightest. But it is so brilliantly done, and I've talked about it back in when I did do the Broadway thing, so I won't do so again, other than to say it's great, and England needs it. Why is no one picking it up and bringing it over here? For heaven's sake, do it.
We get a lot of that kind of failure to come over here. I'm still waiting for the definitive curtains to come to London.
Oh, that would be great too.
Yeah,
I saw that at the was it Arts Ed did that a while ago, and I saw it there.
And it's done in amateur, and it's done in schools, and it's done in theatre schools. But if you want it on the West End, you're not going to see it for some time.
Which is so disappointing because Cantor and Ebb is historically an extremely successful combination. You look at the success of the Scottsboro Boys,
which did come to London, was magnificent. Yeah.
Yes, it was. Yeah. And I remember reading at the time that somebody said that what's it called? Commencing. Something to Chattanooga. I can't remember I haven't listened to it for a while now, but it was the best train song that had been written for years.
Gosh, right.
And I absolutely agree. Yeah. And it's so evocative of what it's doing. And anyway, Curtains, beautiful musical, hysterically funny. Yeah. Was obviously great with David Hyde Pierce on the recording.
Yes, quite.
I enjoyed it when I saw it at Arts Ed with a student production. I'd love to see a pro production of that come over. But jumping back, infinitesimal amount to that previous conversation, specifically for one reference, which was the year that I saw Gentleman's Guide. As I say, it was nominated for 2 Tonys for the 2 leading actors. I also happened to see Hedwig, which, if I remember correctly, won.
So he was less angry on that day.
Yeah. And what was the other one? There was another show I saw, and I forget what it was right now, that was nominated for Tony. And the one that I did not see was Rocky.
Oh, right.
It was the five lead actor Tony noms, and it was the one thing we were thinking about seeing. Didn't get tickets on the right day and never saw, and it amused me when the Tonys came out. But I used that as a point of reference to say I have now seen Rocky. I really enjoyed it.
You see, that seems such an odd choice for musicalisation, but it's got conflict, of course, built in rather.
It does. Although interestingly, it's one of those things, and I was actually having a conversation last night with the guy who deals with the theatre company in Canada who that put it on, which is Drayton Entertainment, and I can't remember how many theatres they have. It's a lot, and they're scattered throughout 5 or 6 towns in Ontario in Canada. And the way they do it is they do these big scale musicals, and they did Fiddler on the Roof, which I saw recently as well. Loved it. Probably much more familiar to this audience, and so I won't say anything other than it was fantastic, and I had a great time. But they pick these big shows up like that, and they take them to 2 or 3 of their theatres in their season, so they move around
it's got a tour
the province.
Yeah.
And Ontario is gigantic.
Yes.
I don't remember how many times you can fit the UK into Ontario, but it's a lot.
Yes.
Until you've been to Canada and driven from one side of any given province to the other, you don't realise how big it is.
Yes, quite.
It takes as long to fly to the west coast of the Canada. I think it's about an hour longer to fly to the UK than it is to fly across Canada or something like that. Anyway, long story short, Rocky, it's not entirely about the conflict. That's not actually what it is. It's a love story that happens to have fighting as an integral part of it. But it makes an excellent musical. I was genuinely impressed by it. I really enjoyed it. It had a brilliant fight sequence. The choreography, apparently they learned all this choreography in an afternoon. And by the end of it, they never connected once.
Oh, really?
Apparently, throughout the entire run. Or at least... never severely.
By which we're talking physical connection.
Physical connection, like the actual boxing.
Yeah.
And this final fight, it goes through all 10 rounds of the final fight. You don't see all 10 rounds in totality, but they're montaged over probably 8 or 9 minutes of consistent fighting.
That's physical workout.
That is a huge... And these guys, like it was insisted that they look like boxers.
Yeah.
And so they trained hard to get this part. But they look like boxers. And I don't just mean in the physical sense.
Yeah.
Like, they looked like they were really boxing each other. It was incredible. And that is a centerpiece, yes, but it's not what the core of the show is. And I haven't actually seen the film of Rocky, so I can't speak to the fidelity of the transcription. But it's a story about a relationship that happens to involve a fighter. And in much the same way as any strong job that's featured in something, you can't feature someone who does that job without featuring that job. And so it has fighting in it. And I think that puts a lot of people off, which is such a shame, because it is such an exceptional show. And obviously this doesn't have Broadway standards because while it is a gigantic scale, it is still a moving touring show. I think they flew the boxing ring in Broadway, which is bonkers. But they did such an incredible job with this, and I really, really enjoyed that. So I recommend Rocky if anyone ever gets a reason to see it. I don't know how successful it will be, whether it'll ever come over here. I think I don't know how long it lasted on Broadway, but
we still haven't had How to Succeed in Business Without Really Trying.
Also criminal.
Yeah. So basically, I don't think it is going to come over here. But I'm very happy to be confounded with all the suggestions we made today, if anyone's listening.
Fair. And then the last one, and I realised this was another Drayton show, and I saw this long enough ago now that I'm not sure I could even give you a decent rendition of the plot. This must have been probably 3 years ago.
So this might be an impressionistic review.
Yes, quite. It was Lucky Stiff.
Oh, do I know that? That sounds familiar.
Let me double check myself. I want to say it's Aarons and Flaherty.
Do you know, I think I saw a Fringe... In fact, I'm going to say I know I saw a Fringe version of it a few years ago because I recorded an interview for Musical Talk. Fair
enough. I had not had the opportunity... Of course, there's no internet here, so I can't double-check. I'm pretty sure it's Aarons and Flaherty. But it's a very, very funny musical. It has a song in it that a lot of people know because it was in the musical theatre anthology called The Phone Call, where it's a guy calling up to explain that he's not going to be coming home for dinner because he's trapped in an international airport and thinks there are people out to kill him. And it's absolutely hilarious. But it's just one of those shows, my overriding impression of it, and it's been too long and I've seen too much since for it to really kind of sit in my mind, but my overriding impression of it was just fun. It's one of those shows that you just sit back, you enjoy, you go along for the ride. It's got the Dirty Rotten Scoundrels thing going for it, where it's just this ridiculous scenario that you can't help but sit back and enjoy. And it's a great score.
Yes. It's cartoony in that sense.
It is cartoony in that sense. And I just think, I was really, really impressed by that. Again, they did a phenomenal production. But it was, I think that's something if you get the chance to see it, and it probably, I don't know if it's at this Fringe, but it would not surprise me to find out that it's something that comes up precisely because it's that kind of light-hearted fun that attracts people.
And it can be done in a Fringe venue because, as I say, I saw it in London in that very format.
Yeah, and it's very much a show that can be pretty much any scale. Obviously, in this case, it was a big theatre that I saw it in, and it was great to see it with that kind of production value. But you could totally throw it into a reasonably sized black box and still make it very, very workable. So, yeah, definitely something, if you get the opportunity to go and see it, I recommend it. And I think, speaking of international airports, I'm going to have to call that a day because I simply need to get up and move, because it's the Edinburgh Fringe and nothing stops for 3 weeks.
It really doesn't. And as you say, yes, there's a song in Lucky Stiff which is about the international airport, and that's where we came in on Come From Away. So it's actually
You are correct.
A perfect ending. Thank you, David.
Oh, book ending. I like it. Unintentional book ending, even better. But yes, I'm sorry to cut the conversation short, but yes, I must move on to the next Edinburgh Fringe demand, which could be one of about 55 things at this point.
Well, David, it's just lovely to see you again. So
Likewise.
Thank you so much for the conversation.
Oh, you're very welcome.
Good luck for the rest of the run.
Thank you very much.
And this seems a forlorn hope, but do stay dry.
Not going to happen.
No, I think so. In the next few minutes as well. We'll speak again.
I look forward to it.
Musical talk. And there we are, that's David Kingsmill. And it was such a joy to see him again in 2019 and to have a chance to talk to him again for Musical Talk, just like old times. And of course, what you heard there, of course, was his view from a Canadian perspective about Come From Away, which had only just opened earlier that year in 2019 when that recording was made. At that time, as you could see, I hadn't seen the show, but I subsequently have, and I hugely enjoyed it, and you'll hear about that next week. And we also had David's views on the transatlantic difference on progressive politics in the arts between Canada and the United Kingdom, and his thoughts on Six. Now, my views on Six are fairly well known. I think it's a fabulous show, but I do lament the lack of narrative, and I'm not sure that I would want to see, as I said, all shows turning into rock concerts. It's fine for Six, but I wouldn't want that to then swamp musical theatre. It doesn't look like that's going to happen, although there have been lots of shows which purport to be the new Six. But success breeds success. But it is, I think, a show which turns Sondheim's dictum on its head, which is that content dictates form. Because I think, whichever way you dice it, Six is a show where the form dictated the content. The idea of the wives of Henry VIII forming a girl band is so delicious and neat that I assume that must have come first. It's difficult to see why it would have worked the other way round, particularly when there is so little narrative drive to the story. But that, of course, as David points out, is not what it's about. And Six is an undoubted success. Well, I hope you've enjoyed listening to this recording from a few years ago, but which is still, I think, pertinent to the world of musical theatre here in the United Kingdom in 2024. Now, next week, we'll be talking to Josh Clark in a much more recent recording about the London production of Come From Away, which we both saw together and which we both adored. It is a great show. It's a feel-good show. And, as I said at the beginning, if you are here in the United Kingdom and you fancy seeing it, you can, because it's on national tour. Do go along to its website, comeFromAwayLondon.co.uk. That London in the title is deceptive, because if you go to the website to see where it's on tour across the country. At the moment, booking until the 5th of January. And I'm sure it won't be the last we hear of that particular show. And nor should it be. But it is the last you'll hear of me, at least for a week, because I'm bringing this episode to an end. And I shall do it in the traditional way. Farewell, so long. Auf Wiedersehen. Goodbye. This episode of Musical Talk presented by Thos and David Kingsmill and edited by Thos. Copyright Musical Talk 2024. To find out more about the world of Musical Talk and listen to past episodes, go along to our website www.musicaltalk.co.uk or subscribe to us on Apple Podcasts and follow us on the usual social media networks like Facebook, Instagram and X, formerly known as Twitter. And if you want to follow me on the latter, you can. At Musical Talk Thos. Same old thing, I'm recording, so a level and then off you go. Really.
I will talk at something like this volume most probably, unless I get extremely excitable, in which case, God help the microphone.
That's all fantastic.
But the specific...